Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Biden declared the U.S.-UK relationship as rock solid as he meets with British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in London today ahead of the two-day NATO summit in Vilnius, Lithuania. Over the weekend, Sunak told reporters the UK opposes cluster munitions as a signatory to the international convention banning their use. Biden's decision to send cluster bombs to Ukraine has sparked intense criticism, including from the UN, due to the danger they pose to civilians. We'll have more on cluster munitions after headlines. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stepping up his campaign for NATO membership. On Friday, he visited Turkey as President Recep Tayyip Erdogan stated Ukraine deserves NATO membership. Zelensky said he hopes to expedite Ukraine's accession to NATO and get clear security guarantees during this week's summit. Meanwhile, President Biden told CNN Sunday Ukraine would not be ready to join the alliance until Russia's invasion, which marked its 500th day Saturday, is over.
I don't think there is unanimity in NATO about whether or not to bring Ukraine into the NATO family now, at this moment.
The UN is urging parties to prioritize global food security and ensure the Black Sea grain deal is extended, allowing the continued export of food and fertilizer from Ukrainian ports. Russia's threatened to quit the deal, which is due to expire in a week, July 17th. President Biden said Friday the U.S. has destroyed the last of its arsenal of banned chemical weapons in a claim corroborated by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Under the Chemical Weapons Convention, which took effect in 1997, the U.S. was supposed to have destroyed its vast stockpile of chemical munitions, including the nerve agents VX and sarin, by 2012. U.S. law enforcement agencies continue to stockpile and deploy large quantities of tear gas, a chemical weapon that's banned in warfare. In Texas, the white nationalist gunman who killed 23 people at an El Paso Walmart in 2019 has been sentenced to 90 consecutive life terms after pleading guilty to federal hate crimes and weapons charges. The gunman still faces murder charges in a state trial that could bring him the death penalty. The mass shooting nearly 4 years ago was the deadliest attack on the Latinx community in modern U.S. history. Shortly before the massacre, the shooter published a racist online manifesto echoing President Trump's rhetoric about an invasion of immigrants crossing the southern border. U.S. climate envoy John Kerry sounding the alarm after scientists reported the Earth logged its fourth hottest days in recorded human history last week.
If you listen to the scientists, which not enough people are, the last week they have described as terrifying and as uncharted territory. When you see the risks of what is happening already with global ice melt, with challenges of fires, of mudslides, of heat, people dying from the level of heat, the quality of air, people are dying around the world, in the millions, by the way. About 8 million people a year die from that.
In Pakistan, authorities report at least 50 people have been killed in floods and landslides since the start of the monsoon season, June 25th. In India, at least 18 people were killed over the weekend as torrential rains swept northern parts of the country. Here in the United States, a massive, slow-moving storm system brought torrential rains to northeastern states Sunday, where officials warned flooding could rival 2011's Hurricane Irene. One person died of drowning in New York's Hudson Valley, which received up to 8 inches of rain. In Tennessee, a panel of federal appeals court judges is allowing a new state law banning gender-affirming care for transgender youth to take effect immediately. The measure had been previously blocked by a lower court following a lawsuit filed by the ACLU on behalf of 3 families and a doctor. Saturday's ruling marks the first time a federal court has allowed a ban on gender-affirming care to be enforced in the United States. Similar legislation has been blocked by federal courts in Arkansas, Alabama, Florida, Indiana, and Kentucky. We'll have more on this story later in the broadcast. We'll go to Nashville. In Sudan, nearly 24 people were killed Saturday in military airstrikes in a residential area of Omdurman, Sudan's most populous city. It was one of the deadliest attacks in an urban area since fighting erupted in April between the Sudanese army and the Rapid Support Forces. At least 17 other people, including 5 children, were killed in an army air raid in Khartoum last month. The UN's warned Sudan is on the brink of a full-scale civil war, as Egypt is hosting talks in Cairo this week on how to end the violence. The Pentagon says U.S. forces killed at least 10 al-Shabaab fighters in overnight airstrikes in a remote area of Somalia Saturday. Separately, the Pentagon said Sunday a U.S. drone strike killed Islamic State leader Osama al-Mahajir in eastern Syria. U.S. Central Command said in a statement no civilians were killed in the drone strike, but said it was assessing reports of a civilian injury. The claims could not be independently verified. CENTCOM said the U.S. strike was carried out by the same MQ-9 drones that were harassed by Russian military aircraft in separate incidents last week in Syrian airspace. In Mexico, another journalist has been found dead. Luis Martin Sanchez Iñiguez, a staff writer for the newspaper La Jornada, had been missing since Wednesday. His body was found Saturday near the city of Tepic in the state of Nayarit. Local officials said his body showed signs of violence with 2 handwritten signs affixed to his corpse, though they didn't reveal what the messages said. The Netherlands government collapsed on Friday after failing to reach an agreement on stricter rules for asylum seekers. Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte said he's quitting politics but will serve as a caretaker leader until general elections are held in November. His ruling coalition came apart after 2 parties objected to plans by Rutte to restrict the rights of migrants whose asylum claims have already been approved, barring them from reuniting with their children. Rutte has denied those reports. Rights groups have blasted his government for closing government-run asylum centers and for dangerous and unsanitary conditions at existing centers that violate European Union standards. An Afghan U.S. military interpreter who fled Afghanistan after the Taliban takeover in 2021 was shot dead last week while working as a Lyft driver in Washington, D.C. 31-year-old Nasrat Ahmadyar had resettled in Virginia with his wife and 4 children, the youngest just 15 months old. A crowdfunding campaign has been set up to help them. A report last year by the group Gig Workers Rising found at least 50 drivers for Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash were killed between 2017 and early 2022. Here in New York, protesters rallied in front of the UN headquarters Friday, demanding the release of 62-year-old Palestinian prisoner, writer, and organizer Walid Daqqa, who has been in Israeli custody since 1986. Daqqa completed his term for the 1984 killing of an Israeli soldier, Moshe Tamam, this year, but he was sentenced to 2 additional years in 2017 for smuggling phone devices into Ketziot prison. This is organizer Munir Attallah speaking at Friday's actions outside the UN.
Walid has developed a rare form of bone marrow cancer, and he has essentially been dealt a death sentence by the Israeli courts because, by the Israeli prison systems, because he's being denied medical care for this life-threatening cancer. And his family has also been denied visitation to see him. So he's in a state of crisis, and we call on them to release him immediately. And we're pushing the UN to push the Israeli regime to do so.
President Biden announced new measures Friday to lower health care costs by cracking down on so-called junk insurance plans, which were expanded under the Trump administration and which typically don't cover so-called pre-existing conditions. The proposed rules take aim at short-term plans by limiting their duration to just a few months and mandating they clearly disclose the limits of the coverage provided. And a judge in Oklahoma has dismissed a reparations lawsuit from the last 3 living survivors of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, in which a white mob burned down what was known as Black Wall Street, the thriving African-American neighborhood of Greenwood. An estimated 300 Black Americans were killed. The 3 plaintiffs, Leslie Benningfield Randall, Viola Fletcher, and Hughes Van Ellis, all over 100 years old now, could still appeal the ruling. Next month, 109-year-old Viola Fletcher is releasing her memoir, Don't Let Them Bury My Story. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.